In the quaint little town of Ravenwood, nestled deep within the woods, there stood a lonely house on the edge of a cliff. The townsfolk whispered about it, calling it the Forsaken Manor, for it was said to be cursed. Many generations had passed, and still no one dared to enter its decrepit walls. But one fateful night, a group of friends, unaware of the horrors that awaited them, decided to unravel the mysteries hidden within. The group consisted of 5 friends: Sarah, the adventurous soul who craved excitement; Mark, the skeptic who always sought rational explanations; Emily, the empathetic and caring friend; David, the daredevil who never backed down from a challenge; and Lisa, the curious skeptic who was always up for an adventure. It was a moonless night when they set foot on the overgrown path leading to the Forsaken Manor. The air was heavy with foreboding, and the shadows seemed to dance eerily around them. As they approached the crumbling facade, Sarah shivered, feeling a chill run down her spine. "Are you sure about this, Sarah?" Mark asked, his voice laced with doubt. Sarah glanced back at him, determination gleaming in her eyes. "Absolutely. We've heard the stories, but no one has ever dared to see what lies within. Tonight, we'll uncover the truth." With hesitant steps, they crossed the threshold into the darkness of the manor. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards creaked beneath their weight. Cobwebs adorned the corners like macabre decorations, and the walls seemed to whisper secrets of the past. As they explored the dilapidated rooms, each step echoed ominously through the empty halls. Sarah led the way, her heart pounding with excitement mingled with fear. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind swept through the corridor, extinguishing their flashlights in an instant. Panic seized their hearts as darkness enveloped them like a suffocating shroud. Sarah fumbled for her flashlight, her hands trembling with fear. But before she could find it, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, echoing through the manor. "Emily!" David shouted, his voice filled with terror. They rushed towards the source of the scream, their hearts pounding in their chests. In the dim moonlight filtering through the cracked windows, they saw Emily lying on the floor, her face contorted in agony. "What happened?" Lisa cried, kneeling beside her friend. Emily's eyes widened with terror as she whispered, I saw a shadow lurking in the darkness." Before they could react, the shadows seemed to come alive, twisting and contorting into grotesque forms. Sarah felt a cold dread creeping over her as she realized they were not alone in the manor. "We need to get out of here, now," Mark exclaimed, his voice trembling with fear. But as they turned to flee, they found their path blocked by an impenetrable darkness. The walls seemed to close in around them, trapping them like helpless prey in a web of nightmares. Desperate, they searched for another way out, but every door was sealed shut. Every window barred against escape. The air grew thick with malevolence, suffocating them with its oppressive weight. And then they heard it, the sound of whispers echoing through the halls, taunting them with promises of doom. Shadows danced mockingly on the walls, their tendrils reaching out to ensnare their trembling victims. Hours passed, or perhaps it was an eternity trapped within the confines of the Forsaken Manor. Time seemed to lose all meaning as they fought to survive against the darkness that threatened to consume them. One by one, their sanity began to unravel, torn apart by the relentless horrors that lurked in the shadows. Sarah clung to the flickering hope of escape, but with each passing moment, it slipped further from her grasp. In the end, they were nothing but lost souls, condemned to wander the halls of the Forsaken Manor for all eternity. Their screams echoed through the darkness, a chilling reminder of the price they paid for their curiosity. And as the sun rose on a new day, the town of Ravenwood whispered of the horrors that lurked within the cursed walls of the Forsaken Manor. But for Sarah and her friends, there would be no escape from the shadow that haunted their nightmares forevermore. It was a warm summer night, the kind that lulls one into a false sense of security. The air was heavy with humidity, making it difficult to breathe. Mrs. Smith tossed and turned in her bed, beads of sweat forming on her brow. She had always been a light sleeper, sensitive to the slightest disturbance. Tonight, however, her sleep was troubled by a nagging sense of unease. Suddenly, a faint noise broke the silence, so subtle that it could easily be mistaken for the wind rustling through the trees. Mrs. Smith's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained her ears, listening intently for any sign of danger. There it was again, a soft creaking sound, like footsteps on the wooden floorboards downstairs. Panic seized her heart as she shook her husband awake. "John, wake up. I think there's someone in the house," she whispered urgently. John groggily opened his eyes, his mind still fogged with sleep. "What? Are you sure?" he muttered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Before Mrs. Smith could answer, the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was unmistakable now, the sound of someone moving stealthily through the house. John's blood ran cold as he realized the gravity of the situation. With trembling hands, he reached for the baseball bat they kept beside the bed for emergencies. "Stay here," he whispered to his wife, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go check it out." Mrs. Smith nodded, her eyes wide with fear, as John slipped out of bed and tiptoed towards the bedroom door. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn back, to lock the door and hide until morning. But he couldn't abandon his family to whatever horrors lurked in the darkness below. As he crept down the stairs, each step seemed to echo like thunder in the stillness of the night. He gripped the baseball bat tightly, his knuckles turning white with tension. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the house itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. At the bottom of the stairs, John paused, listening intently for any sign of movement. The house was eerily quiet now, the only sound his own ragged breathing. With a sense of dread, he turned towards the living room, where the intruder seemed to be lurking. What he saw next froze him in his tracks. A figure stood in the shadows, its silhouette outlined against the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. It was tall and menacing, its features obscured by the darkness. For a moment, John's mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. This couldn't be real, it had to be a nightmare. But then the figure moved, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a shiver down John's spine. It was coming towards him, its steps slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, John raised the baseball bat, ready to defend himself and his family at any cost. The intruder stopped just a few feet away, its face still hidden in the shadows. John could feel the tension crackling in the air, thick and suffocating. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fear. The figure said nothing, its silence more terrifying than any words could ever be. And then, with a sudden movement, it lunged forward, its intentions clear. John swung the baseball bat with all his strength, the sound of impact reverberating through the room. For a moment, there was chaos, the sound of breaking glass, the scuffle of feet on the floorboards. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. John stood panting in the darkness, the baseball bat clutched tightly in his hands. The intruder lay motionless at his feet, a dark pool of blood spreading beneath its still form. Trembling with shock and disbelief, John rushed to turn on the lights, revealing the face of the intruder for the first time. But what he saw sent a chill down his spine. It was a face he knew all too well, a face that belonged to someone he had once called a friend. As the truth slowly dawned on him, John's mind reeled with horror. How could this have happened? How could someone he trusted betray him in such a violent and terrifying manner? And more importantly, what other horrors lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike when least expected? As dawn broke over Maple Street, casting its warm glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood, the Smith family emerged from their house, shaken but alive. But the scars of that fateful night would linger for years to come, a chilling reminder of the fragility of peace and the darkness that lurks just beyond the threshold of safety. And as they looked out at the world with new eyes, they knew that they could never truly feel safe again. For in the dead of night, when the world sleeps and the shadows grow long, evil still roams the streets, searching for its next victim.